Zimbabwe's economy is in crisis. It's half the size it was a decade ago, and now cash is drying up. Banks are running out of money, triggering panic withdrawals. A raft of new plans have been drafted to contain the crisis, including a parallel currency. But it's all adding to concern that history may be about to repeat itself.
It's become a way of life. Sleeping outside the bank is the only way some Zimbabweans can get cash. There have been cash shortages for months because the government is broke. Some banks have limited withdrawals to $50 a day per person.
3 days, 3 nights.
We spent 3 days, let's just say 3 nights. We come and sleep out here. Maybe tomorrow I'll withdraw a little money. Some the next day, maybe again on day 3.
When the sun comes up, the queue moves painfully slowly. Charles Matimba saw his savings wiped out when the Zimbabwe dollar crashed in the late 1990s. The 63-year-old pensioner suffers from poor health and worries he could spend days in the queue.
I always think about my time wasted. 25 years is not a joke, but it was going for nothing. So I don't know who can help us to ask the government, what about those pensioners who lost their monies, who lost those years, like 25 years, like 30 years. We didn't get anything till now. That's where my problem comes.
In 2009, Zimbabwe demonetized the Zimbabwean dollar, their national currency, in favor of the US dollar. The following segment will go in depth about the reasoning behind this decision and its impact on the economy of Zimbabwe and its people.
Zimbabwe used to have its own currency, but the presses couldn't keep up with a runaway inflation rate that reached 500% in 2009 and led to this, the famous $100 trillion note worth about $300 at the time. The currency eventually collapsed, and Zimbabwe has since been circulating US dollars, South African rand, and even Chinese yuan. But cash is running out. A year ago, Zimbabweans were using candy as small change, prompting the Reserve Bank to issue so-called bond coins. Now the Reserve Bank announced it's preparing to print special bond notes pegged to the US dollar. Critics accuse the government of rigging the economy.
The majority of the people who have to go out and find their wares cannot use the bond. And it means that our people will become even poorer and poorer and poorer. There is no economy which is run on the basis of a paper which has no financial value.
Zimbabwe has 9 currencies which are legal tender, but not all of them are accepted on the streets of Harare. And just a stone throw away, I'm going to find out just how many different currencies are accepted in average retail stores. What about the Chinese currency yuan?
Yeah, I know. Dollars and euro.
Dollars and euro.
Yes.
And
dollars and rands.
Dollars and rands. You take dollars and rands. You take dollar and euro.
And euro, yeah.
Would you accept Chinese currency?
I don't want Chinese currency.
Did you accept rands previously, though?
Yes, that was.
When did you stop?
I think when it started falling last year.
But why exactly has the country been forced to demonetize its currency? The answer is hyperinflation. In 2000, President Robert Mugabe decided to change his country's economic policy, implementing land reform. This meant that land owned by white citizens was given to black citizens who were often unskilled in farming practices. Not only did mass violence ensue, but the country turned from an agricultural exporter into an importer, gaining an unemployment rate of 94%. That's when hyperinflation set in. By 2008, the monthly inflation rate hit 3.5 million%, meaning a single egg cost $50 billion, a bus ticket $100 trillion, and a loaf of bread the equivalent of 12 new cars 10 years before. Prices doubled every 25 hours, so the government kept printing more money to try to counteract the problem until the currency became worthless. Thus, Zimbabwe had the second worst hyperinflation in history after Hungary post-World War II. So this official currency switch will mean that Zimbabwe won't have its own independent monetary policy any longer. But it will be able to clean up the banking system and bury its worthless currency that has long since been dead.
Zimbabwe has adopted a multi-currency system since the collapse of its local currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, in 2009. The most used currency in the southern African country since then has been the US dollar and South African rand. The Botswana pula and British pound are also among the foreign currencies allowed to circulate. The decision was unveiled by the monetary statement issued by Acting Governor of Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, Charity Dliwayo. Zimbabwe's Finance Minister Patrick Chinamasa, in his annual budget statement last year in December, told the nation that the multiple currency system is to stay for a foreseeable future. A local economist, Mr. Mugaga, explains further.
You realize that the move to introduce these other currencies could have been employed to try to ease the liquidity challenges within the Zimbabwean economy.
As 2016 winds down, a prosperous new year is not what's beckoning. Zimbabwe expects marginal economic growth in 2017 and will face similar, if not increased, fiscal pressures. All this with a huge debt burden hanging over its head.
In 2017, we have to tackle the issue very decisively and very clearly, the issue of the debt overhang. As far as the country is concerned, we owe $11.2 billion, and that needs to be tackled in a very clear way. We know that it's being worked on, but we now need to start communicating what exactly is the plan.
The finance minister and central bank governor have already cleared long-standing arrears to the IMF and hope to settle outstanding obligations to other creditors in 2017. They have scarce resources to do so and will need to control the purse.
We need to control the fiscal deficit and make sure that it doesn't run away, and expenditure, essentially austerity, to create fiscal space, reduce your expenditure, grow the cake. And how do you grow the cake? Stimulate productivity. And make sure that you attract foreign direct investment.
FDI inflows have gone down significantly, and most investors, they actually say Zimbabwe remains a problematic investment destination to do business. Our tax regime is not conducive for doing business. So I think government needs to prioritize the doing business environment.
Zimbabwe will also try to narrow the gap between imports and exports. The former outstripped the latter by at least $1.5 billion. The imbalance will maintain a chronic cash shortage that's delaying international payments.
It is a problem. We need some short-term measures to allow companies to prioritize critical companies that are being supported, to allow them to pay. And then obviously the issue of increasing liquidity internally by allowing bigger bond notes, both in size, maybe $20, to allow people to actually transact in a meaningful way.
Government has recently concluded 99-year farm leases, which could finally give resettled farmers title and access to funding. Getting agriculture going again will help substitute imports and generate a supply line for the manufacturing sector. Agriculture is projected to grow by 12%. If that is achieved and other reforms remain on track, then there might be some cheer yet in the new year.
Zimbabwe depends almost entirely on imports, an economic model that critics blame on President Mugabe's policy of seizing private farms and overspending. Zimbabwe still exports tobacco, but crops and sales have been crippled by months of drought. Dry weather has also fueled a malnutrition crisis unseen in over 15 years. The UN predicts more than 4 million people will need food aid next year. There's concern that Zimbabwe's cash crisis is fast becoming a humanitarian one.
First and most importantly, Zimbabwe must cut back on government spending, because this is a primary reason for why Zimbabwe is in this economic crisis. Government officials should work on increasing foreign direct investment by improving the reputation Zimbabwe has with creditors to attract new business to the country and stimulate its economy. This is essential because there is a 93% unemployment rate in Zimbabwe. Putting Zimbabweans back to work will help their stifled economy by increasing spending per household. Zimbabwe should also look to increase their production of crops because currently they are buying more and more food to try and feed their people. Increasing production by 12% or more will greatly reduce this cost and could even increase GDP for the Zimbabwean economy. Lastly, the creation of legal tender in the past has often proved to be an impediment to competition between monies. But in this respect, the monetary regime in Zimbabwe is in many ways unique in recent history. The truth is that in reality, all of these varying currencies has actually devalued their dollar and economy even more. Zimbabwe's central bank needs to trim their selection of currencies down to just the US dollar and the South African rand. These two currencies were chosen because the dollar is the most accepted currency worldwide, and Zimbabwe does most of its trading with South Africa and has always been open to using the South African rand in their own country.
We first presented an arrears clearance plan to the IMF and the World Bank in Peru's capital in October. The plan proposes clearing the 1.8 billion in arrears by refinancing existing debt. However, as the president of the African Development Bank explained, Zimbabwe has a lot more to do in order to get its economy back on track.
We've been on the Zimbabwe issue for quite some time. I think there are, there's the African Development Bank, that's the World Bank, and there's the IMF, in which we are working very closely together to support the country with what we call the arrears clearing system. Essentially just to be able to get it back into the international financial institutions, to be able to get access to the financing we can provide, requires that we clear the outstanding debt. And I think we're very close to doing that. I am very positive that before the end of the year, we'll be able to sort that out. I'm very, very encouraged. We've had a lot of good discussions by all parties, and I think we're close to resolving that particular issue. But we look at other countries, such as Nigeria. Of course, Nigeria is Africa's, biggest economy. It's going through some rough times because of the significant fall in the price of oil. But I think that we've been quite encouraged with what we've seen most recently in terms of the removal of the quantitative restriction in terms of foreign exchange, but also in terms of the more liberalization, if you wish, of the exchange rate, so that the financial markets can have the predictability that is needed to be able to draw in significant amount of foreign direct investment, which a country needs.
Back to Zimbabwe briefly, though. I mean, the country's got a serious cash flow problem right now. I mean, we've had incidents where, say, from the 1st of July, doctors will not be accepting any payments from medical insurance providers, which portends a really nasty public health issue. But an economy like that, with that level of cash flow problems, how possibly can they get back on track to resolve the, $6 or $8 billion worth of public debt they've got?
Well, I mean, it's not a very straightforward issue. There are issues, political issues. There are also governance issues. There are historical issues. There are policy issues that have to be resolved there, and they are working on it. I think that the real game changer here will be the arrears clearance. Once that is sorted out, and the policy environment improves, to be able to make it easier for private sector to be able to invest, but also to have access to liquidity. Because, if you don't have, you have a lot of medium and small and medium-sized enterprises in Zimbabwe that are dying to have access to Forex, to be able to import machinery, to be able to import equipment and raw materials. And so the African Development Bank, we make actually loans to intermediary financial institutions, including most recently in Zimbabwe, to allow them to be able to have access to that. So if a patient is sick, sometimes they don't get well instantaneously regardless of what he says. So it's going to take, some of it will be immediate, some will be medium term, and some will be long term. But I do expect that Zimbabwe will recover.